over there in 61 or 62, and Mom had a wreck. It was right after that. And that was only, he got out in 44. So it wasn't that long between then and then that he'd been out of the war, a major war. You know, not that long ago. I've got a paper in here. Have you ever seen that one of Mom's, the article about Mom's wreck?
Maybe. I was going through some of Dad's stuff.
There was an article?
Yeah.
I was going through some of Dad's stuff and came across a couple of things. He had a whole area of stuff that he just... See if this is what I remember Dad having.
That's Mom's car. That's the truck that hit her right there.
The old Chevy.
That's Lord. It was hit right there. That's where she was sitting. That's the back door. She was hit right there.
You didn't even read that.
Yeah, it gives the article there.
Hand it to me when you're done.
Well, you read it out loud.
I got that.
Read it out loud.
Yeah,
Okay,
'cause
so
it's-
does it go down and then
Yeah,
over?
that's how. So the
Starts right there.
two
No, I
persons.
can read it. I just asked you a question.
Yeah, I'm just telling you where to start.
Well, thank you. 2 persons were injured, one critically, in a car-truck collision at an intersection 6 miles west of Columbus Y and 1 mile south at 7:15 last night. Admitted to the city hospital were Miss Anna Mae Kelley, 39, and Clifford Lloyd Crane, 17, both of Hallowell, Route 1. Mrs. Kelley, who reportedly suffered a brain injury and severe facial lacerations, was transferred about an hour later to the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City, making the trip in a Jordan ambulance. Her condition this morning was reported grave. Mr. Crane reportedly suffered severe bruises and lacerations. According to the Sheriff Frenchie Lawson, Crane's northbound 1962 Chevrolet pickup truck collided with Mrs. Kelley's westbound 1952 Pontiac at an intersection. Lawson said Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd Brown of Columbus were believed to be the first persons on the scene. They notified authorities. Mrs. Kelley was taken to the hospital in a Jordan ambulance. Crane was taken to the home of his parents and was then brought to the hospital by his father, Clifford Crane, the sheriff said. Mrs. Kelley's husband, Virgil Kelley, was mowing weeds in a pasture about 100 yards from where the accident took place, Sheriff Lawson said, and he arrived at the scene shortly after the Browns. Mr. Kelley did not know his wife was one of the victims until he reached the scene, the sheriff said. The Kelley home is located 2 miles west and 1.5 mile south of where the accident occurred. Mrs. Kelley was en route home from the city hospital where she was employed in the kitchen. Both vehicles were demolished in the crash, the sheriff said. Sheriff Lawson and Deputy Sheriff Carol Lawson Jr. investigated.
Yeah. They called him Pruny. His nickname was Pruny Lawson.
Yeah, so
Yep.
she got T-boned
Yep, she got hit right there in the door.
right there in the door. Which
And
is
see,
why.
right there in front of the car is a big culvert, concrete culvert. She hit it, splattered it out in the field. And it flipped his car, his in the ditch. And it throwed him out through the windshield, throwed him out in the field. Yeah, Dad got there, and Dad had to open the back door, and she was wadded up in the passenger floorboard. She was down there in the passenger floorboard, and he said blood was gurgling out of her mouth, and she was choking on her own blood, and it held her head back and stuff. And finally, he reached over the seat, picked her up, and she was a pretty heavy-set gal. Picked her up
very sturdy.
and picked her up over the seat and picked her out and put her on the stretcher.
Broken bones and all.
Her neck, and then he found out, what, years later, her neck had been broken in 2 places. They didn't know that until, but they kept her so still, and then they had the brain injury. See, they didn't have the chemicals to keep swelling down in your brain, so they packed her in ice. She was packed in ice. Dad went in there one time. I guess the ice had melted, and she was laying there in water, and boy, he jumped her ass. You know, get that out of there and stuff. Yeah, it was 3 months, 4 months later. 4 months, I think 4 months later, she was in a coma. 4 or 5, about 5 months later before we ever saw her again. And then she kind of looked. They snuck us in the hospital at Columbus. I remember sitting on the outside and watching. They had her arms wrapped in towels, and through the windows I could see her arm go. She's kind of flailing, you know, going like that. I could see her arm raise up and down. And then when we went in, the nurses, they wouldn't. Of course, back then you kids weren't supposed to be in the room. But one of the nurses went down one way and one went the other way, and they checked and okay. They snuck us kids in there. Let us go in and see her. She sat there and looked at me. And she just kind of sat there and stared. She's laying there staring like that. And I think I said, "Hi, Mama," or something. And she sat there and just looked for a minute, and then she went like this. Yeah.
She didn't know she had kids when
No,
she woke up.
she didn't even know she was married. Dad said, "Well, you think it's about time to go home?" And of course they had a trachea on her, and she had to hold a patch over her throat to talk. And she said, "Don't you think we ought to be married first?" Like that. She didn't know. Finally, her memory started coming back, and her memory came back. But Ruth and them said she changed a lot. She was mean, kind of mean and cranky. And so I don't remember that. But the girls said, yeah, she was kind of mean, and well, she had a lot of brain injury and stuff. But she had to learn to walk and talk and everything.
Right.
Read everything. But when her memory came back, hell, she could remember stuff when she was 3 years old. I mean, she could remember memory come back good. She had a good memory.